Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving deep today into a case that really caught my eye.
Oh, yeah. I saw this one in the news. What a mess.
It is. We're looking at the legal battle between Rudy Giuliani, America's mayor,
Right.
and two Georgia election workers,
Hmm.
Ruby Freeman and Sheay Moss.
What's the background there again?
So this stems back to the aftermath of the 2020 election.
Oh, okay.
We've got a ton of news articles and court documents to unpack here, but basically, Giuliani, acting as Trump's lawyer at the time, publicly accused Freeman and Moss of voter fraud.
Serious accusation.
Just very serious, and ultimately unfounded, as it turns out.
So they sued him for defamation.
Exactly. And they won a huge judgment, almost $150 million.
Wow. That's a hefty sum.
Yeah.
Did they actually get that money, though?
That's where things get interesting, because instead of going to trial, they settled.
Interesting. So Giuliani dodged a bullet there.
In a way, yeah.
Sure.
He did agree to compensate them financially. The details are private, of course.
And I guess that allowed him to keep his assets, right? Because there were rumors he might have to sell off some pretty valuable things.
Yeah, like his apartment in New York City, a couple of World Series rings, even a condo in Florida. It was a close call for him.
It sounds like it. But, for Freeman and Moss, this wasn't about money.
What do you mean?
Their lawyers actually worked pro bono on the case. It seems like they were determined to hold Giuliani accountable no matter what.
That's a powerful statement for sure. They were just doing their jobs, counting votes, and suddenly they're thrust into this national spotlight, facing accusations and threats.
It really highlights the dark side of our digital age, how quickly misinformation can spread, and the devastating impact it can have on individuals.
Absolutely. It's scary to think how easily your life can be turned upside down in the blink of an eye.
And I think that's a big part of why Freeman and Moss pursued this so vigorously. They wanted to set a precedent, to show that you can't just make false statements without consequences.
They wanted their reputations back.
Exactly.
But this raises another point, right? To win a defamation case, you have to prove harm.
Right. And in this case, because Giuliani is a public figure, Freeman and Moss had to prove what's called actual malice.
Actual malice.
Yes. Basically, they had to show that Giuliani knew his statements were false or he acted with reckless disregard for the truth.
That seems pretty hard to prove.
It definitely adds another layer of complexity to an already complicated situation.
Yeah.
But the judge ultimately ruled in their favor.
So even though Giuliani settled, the court did affirm that he was in the wrong.
Precisely. And that in itself is significant.
It is. But even with the settlement and the judge's ruling, there are still so many unanswered questions, right? Like, was Giuliani acting alone? Did he get help spreading this misinformation?
It's a good question. There's also the whole Trump angle.
Oh, right. Remember when Trump posted "Save Rudy" on social media?
Yeah, that was bizarre. What was his role in all this?
It's still unclear. When reporters asked Giuliani's lawyer about Trump, all they got was no comment.
It's like they're trying to keep the focus solely on Giuliani and distance Trump from the whole mess.
So much intrigue. It's almost like a political thriller.
Well, maybe without the happy ending for everyone involved.
Okay. And speaking of Giuliani, his situation seems, well, complicated. He's been held in contempt of court not once, but twice. There have even been reports about his health, potential financial strain.
Yeah, it sounds like he's going through a lot.
He is, but then you see him posting on social media talking about attending Trump's second inauguration and hanging out at Mar-a-Lago. Like, everything's fine.
It's quite the contrast.
It's jarring, really. Like, which version is the real Rudy Giuliani?
It makes you think about the image we project online versus the reality we live in.
Deep stuff. And we're just getting started.
This is where it gets really interesting.
We're going to take this even deeper in part 2, exploring the broader implications of this case for free speech, accountability, and the future of truth in our digital age.
Can't wait. Welcome back, everyone. We're picking up our deep dive where we left off, looking at the case of Rudy Giuliani and those Georgia election workers.
It's wild to think about how this case has kind of become this emblem of, like, the struggle for truth and accountability in our digital age.
Yeah, and what happens when those in positions of power, people we're supposed to trust, they abuse that power and spread misinformation?
It's a big question. Did this case give us any, like, wins in the fight against all that? I mean, did anything good come out of it?
Well, it's definitely a mixed bag. I think, on the one hand, the fact that Freeman and Moss were able to hold Giuliani accountable at all, even if they don't end up collecting the full judgment, it does send a message.
It shows that, like, even powerful people aren't above the law, and there are consequences for spreading falsehoods.
Exactly. But it also, it raises some really tricky questions about free speech and where we draw the line between protecting that right and preventing the spread of harmful misinformation.
It's such a tough balance to strike, especially with social media. Like, everything moves so fast online.
It really does.
Yeah.
In this case, Giuliani's defense was essentially that he was exercising his right to free speech.
Right. But then you have Freeman and Moss, whose lives were, really turned upside down by those very words.
Precisely. So it becomes a question of whose rights are more important, Where do we draw the line?
Yeah, it's like your right to say something can't come at the expense of someone else's safety and security. This reminds me of all the debates about free speech online these days.
Absolutely. It all ties together. It feels like our laws and social norms are struggling to keep up with the pace of technology and the way information spreads online.
It's like we need a whole new rule book for the digital age. This case might even change how we approach online speech going forward. What do you think?
I think it has the potential to, yeah. The internet has fundamentally changed the way we consume information, and it's about time we grapple with the consequences of that.
We talked about accountability a bit earlier, but do you think it applies to more than just Giuliani? Like, what about the platforms themselves? They have so much power too, right?
They do. And I think there's a growing recognition that they need to be held accountable as well. Whether it's through regulation, public pressure, or internal reforms, they can't just stand by and allow the spread of harmful content.
It feels like we're all kind of figuring this out as we go along, you know? Like, what's the best way to combat misinformation without stifling free speech?
It's a process, that's for sure. But I think it starts with each of us making conscious choices about what we consume, what we share.
Being more critical of the information we encounter online.
Exactly. Asking questions, checking sources, not just accepting everything at face value.
Easier said than done, though. It can be so overwhelming, the sheer volume of information we're exposed to every day.
It is. But I think education is key here. We need to equip people with the tools and the knowledge to navigate this complex digital landscape.
Like digital citizenship, right? Understanding our rights and responsibilities in this new online world.
Exactly. And that education needs to start early and be ongoing because the online world is constantly evolving.
Okay. We've talked a lot about the big picture stuff, free speech, accountability, technology, but we can't forget the human side of this story.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, this is about real people, real lives that were impacted.
What happened to Freeman and Moss after all of this?
Well, they faced threats, harassment, public scrutiny. Their lives were turned upside down.
And it's all because they were just doing their jobs.
It's a reminder that words have consequences.
Yeah, and those consequences can be devastating. What do you think their experience says about the state of our society today?
I think it says that we have a lot of work to do when it comes to truth, accountability, and empathy.
We have to be more mindful of the information we spread and the impact it can have on others. It's easy to get lost in the legal weeds of this case, but it's important to remember the human cost.
Right, exactly.
This isn't just some abstract legal battle. These are real people's lives that were deeply affected by this.
It really makes you think about the power of words, especially in this digital age where everything can go viral so quickly.
And the responsibility that comes with that power,
Absolutely.
Like when you have someone like Giuliani with such a huge platform making these serious accusations, it can have a ripple effect that's felt far and wide.
It's a good point because it raises the question for me of where do we draw the line between free speech and, being responsible for the things we say.
Especially online.
Especially online where things can spread like wildfire.
So what does this all mean for the average person scrolling through their social media feed? Like, how should they be thinking about this case?
I think the biggest takeaway is that we can't just passively consume information anymore. We have to be more discerning, more critical of what we're seeing and reading.
Because not everything you see online is true, obviously.
Obviously.
But even beyond that, there's so much nuance and context that can be lost online.
Right, and it's easy to get caught up in the emotion of a story or to just blindly accept what someone is saying without really thinking about it.
So how do we do that? How do we become more critical thinkers, especially in a world where things move so fast online?
Well, I think education is a huge part of it.
Yeah.
Teaching people how to evaluate sources, how to spot misinformation, how to think critically about the information they're consuming.
It's almost like we need a whole new set of digital literacy skills for the 21st century.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's not just about being able to spot fake news or whatever. It's also about being aware of our own biases and being open to different perspectives.
I agree.
It's about having those difficult conversations even when they're uncomfortable and being willing to change our minds when presented with new information.
And I think it's also about recognizing that we all have a responsibility to create a healthier online environment.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, we can choose to amplify voices of reason and accuracy. We can challenge misinformation when we see it.
Yeah.
We can promote a culture of respectful dialogue even when we disagree.
It's like we're all in this together, right?
Right. It's not just up to the platforms or the government or whatever. We all have a role to play.
I like that. It's empowering in a way.
It is. We have more power than we think to shape the online world.
Well, this deep dive has been fascinating and honestly a bit overwhelming at times.
It is a lot to take in for sure.
But I think it's so important to have these conversations and to really grapple with these complex issues.
I agree.
So as we wrap up, what are your final thoughts for our listeners?
I guess I would say be mindful of the information you consume and share. Be critical, be skeptical, but also be open-minded, and most importantly, be kind.
Words matter. They have the power to build up or to tear down, so let's use them wisely.
Well said.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder all of this. We've covered a lot of ground, from the legal battle itself to the broader questions of free speech accountability and the power of words in our digital age.
Hopefully this deep dive has given you some food for thought and some tools to navigate this increasingly complex world.
And as always, we encourage you to keep diving deep, keep asking questions, and keep searching for the truth.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Until next time.